The silence in the Bianchi mansion had never felt heavier than it did on Christmas Eve morning. Marisol Vega stood in the marble foyer, her single suitcase by her feet, watching 5-year-old Martina color at the kitchen island through the archway. The little girl's dark curls fell like a curtain around her face as she worked, completely absorbed in her art, unaware that today would be their last day together. Marisol's chest tightened. 3 months. That's all it had been since she'd answered the ad for a nanny who could communicate in sign language. 3 months since she'd walked into this cold, beautiful house and met a grieving widower who barely looked at his own daughter. 3 months since she'd fallen hopelessly in love with both the broken little girl and the dangerous man who was sending her away. "It's better this way," Salvatore had said the night before, his ice-cold voice cutting through her heart. "She's getting too attached." But as Marisol watched Tina carefully select each crayon, signing to herself in the silent language they shared, she knew the truth. It wasn't just Tina who had gotten attached, and that terrified Salvatore Bianchi more than any enemy ever could. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Bel Air mansion, casting long shadows across the pristine white marble floors. Marisol had been awake since dawn, unable to sleep, knowing this would be her final morning in the house that had somehow become home. She'd been surviving in Los Angeles for 2 years, working 3 jobs to send money back to her family in Guadalajara while putting herself through community college. The nanny position had seemed like a miracle. Excellent pay, live-in accommodation, and the chance to use the sign language she'd learned caring for her deaf cousin back home. What she hadn't expected was Salvatore Bianchi himself. The man was a contradiction that made her pulse race and her survival instincts scream in equal measure. At 34, he commanded respect with a single look, his presence filling any room he entered. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power, the perfectly tailored suits, the way people stepped aside when he walked past, the quiet authority in his voice when he gave orders. But it was the moments when he thought no one was watching that had captured her heart. The way his shoulders sagged when he looked at his daughter's empty bedroom, the exhaustion that lined his face when he came home late, running hands through his dark hair, the careful distance he maintained from Tina, as if he was afraid his touch might break her further. "Good morning, beautiful girl," Marisol signed, as Tina looked up from her coloring book, her face brightening with the smile that had become Marisol's favorite sight in the world. "Mari, look." Tina's small hands moved excitedly, showing off her drawing of 3 stick figures under a Christmas tree. "It's us, you, me, and Papa." Marisol's throat tightened. "It's perfect, sweetheart." "Are we decorating the tree today?" Papa said maybe. Tina's signs grew hesitant, the hope in her dark eyes almost too much to bear. Marisol knelt beside the kitchen island, bringing herself to Tina's eye level. How could she explain that there would be no tree decorating? That in a few hours she'd be gone forever? That Salvatore had made it clear her services were no longer needed? "Let's have breakfast first," she signed, forcing brightness into her expression. "What would you like, pancakes?" Tina nodded enthusiastically, but her attention shifted as heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Salvatore appeared in the doorway, and Marisol's breath caught as it did every morning. He wore a charcoal-grey suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, but it was his eyes, those intense brown eyes that seemed to see everything, that made her heart race. "Buongiorno, Tina," he said softly, his voice carrying the slight Italian accent that made her name sound like music. Tina waved shyly, then returned to her coloring. The distance between father and daughter was a physical thing, a chasm that Marisol had spent 3 months trying to bridge. "Mr. Bianchi," Marisol said, standing and smoothing her simple jeans and sweater. Even after 3 months, he'd never invited her to use his first name. His gaze found hers, and for a moment something flickered in those dark depths, regret, maybe, or longing. But it was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it. "The car will be here at noon," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "to take you to the airport." "I understand." She kept her own voice steady, professional, even as her heart shattered. "I've packed everything. I'll spend the morning with Tina, help her understand." "No." The word came out sharper than intended, and Tina looked up, sensing the tension. Salvatore's jaw tightened. "Don't tell her you're leaving. It's easier this way." Marisol stared at him, incredulous. "You want me to just disappear? She's 5 years old, Mr. Bianchi. She doesn't understand why people leave. Her mother—" "Don't." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Don't bring Maria into this." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and buried pain. Tina continued coloring, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding above her head. "She trusts me," Marisol said finally, her voice barely audible. "If I just vanish, it will destroy that trust. It will destroy her." Something cracked in Salvatore's carefully controlled expression. For just a moment, she saw the broken man beneath the powerful exterior, the father who was terrified of failing his daughter again, the widower who couldn't bear another loss. "She'll recover," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Children are resilient." "Are they?" Marisol challenged, glancing at Tina, who hadn't spoken a single word since her mother's death 2 years ago. "Because from where I stand, it looks like she's still waiting for her mama to come home." The words hit their mark. Salvatore's face went pale, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. "You're here to do a job, Miss Vega, not to psychoanalyze my family." He turned toward the door, then paused. "The new nanny starts after New Year's. Someone more appropriate." And with that, he was gone, leaving Marisol alone with Tina and the weight of an impossible goodbye. As she watched the little girl carefully color inside the lines, Marisol made a decision. She wouldn't disappear like a ghost. She'd find a way to say goodbye properly, to help Tina understand that leaving didn't always mean abandonment, even if it broke her own heart in the process. But she had no idea that before this Christmas Eve was over, everything would change. That the little girl who hadn't spoken in 2 years would find her voice at the moment it mattered most. And that Salvatore Bianchi, the man who thought he could control everything, was about to discover that some things, love, family, Christmas miracles, couldn't be commanded or dismissed. They could only be embraced. 3 months earlier, Marisol had been 20 minutes early for the interview, sitting in her beat-up Honda Civic outside the imposing gates of the Bel Air mansion, trying to calm her nerves. The ad had been specific. Nanny needed for special needs child. Must be fluent in American Sign Language. Excellent compensation. Discretion required. She'd almost talked herself out of applying. Her experience was limited to caring for her cousin Miguel back home and a few babysitting jobs in LA. But the salary listed was more than her 3 part-time jobs combined, and her family needed the money for her father's medical bills. The gates had opened silently, revealing a driveway that curved through manicured gardens toward a house that looked more like a museum than a home. All glass and marble and sharp angles, beautiful but cold. Rosa Delacroix, the housekeeper, had answered the door, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a thick French accent. "Ah, you must be Miss Vega. Come, come, Mr. Bianchi is waiting in his study." The interior had taken Marisol's breath away. Everything was white and silver and expensive, from the crystal chandelier in the foyer to the Italian leather furniture in the living room, but it felt empty, like a showroom rather than a place where a family lived. "Where is the little girl?" Marisol had asked as Rosa led her down a hallway lined with abstract art. Rosa's expression had grown sad. "Tina is in her room. She doesn't come out much. Not since—" She'd trailed off, shaking her head. "Mr. Bianchi will explain." The study had been all dark wood and leather-bound books, dominated by a massive desk where Salvatore Bianchi sat reviewing documents. When he'd looked up, Marisol's first thought was that he was younger than she'd expected. Her second was that he was the most beautiful man she'd ever seen, and the most dangerous. Everything about him had screamed power, the expensive suit, the confident posture, the way he studied her like he could read her secrets. But it was his eyes that had caught her attention. Dark brown, almost black, and filled with a pain he was trying hard to hide. "Miss Vega." He'd stood, extending a hand. His grip had been firm, warm, and she'd felt electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." She'd perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk, acutely aware of her simple dress and worn shoes in this palace of wealth. "Tell me about your experience with sign language," he'd said, getting straight to business. "My cousin Miguel was born deaf," she'd explained, her hands moving as she spoke. "I learned ASL to communicate with him. I've been signing since I was 12. Something had shifted in his expression as he watched her hands move. "And your experience with children?" "I helped raise Miguel and my younger siblings. I've been babysitting since I moved to LA 2 years ago." She'd hesitated, then added, "I know I don't have formal training, but I love children, and I understand what it's like to feel different, left out." He'd leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "My daughter Tina is 5 years old. She's been deaf since birth. Her mother," his voice had caught almost imperceptibly, "her mother died 2 years ago. Since then, Tina has been struggling." Marisol's heart had ached for the little girl she hadn't even met yet. "I'm sorry for your loss." The previous nannies couldn't connect with her. They knew sign language, but he'd run a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Tina hasn't spoken since Maria died. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong, she just chooses silence." "Sometimes silence feels safer," Marisol had said softly. "When the world gets too loud, too scary, we retreat to where it can't hurt us." Their eyes had met across the desk, and for a moment she'd seen past his carefully controlled exterior to the grieving father underneath. "The position would be live-in," he'd continued. "Tina needs consistency, stability. She's been through enough changes." His voice had hardened slightly. "I should also mention that my business requires discretion. You would sign a confidentiality agreement. What you see and hear in this house stays in this house." Marisol had nodded, though warning bells had gone off in her head. She'd heard whispers about certain wealthy families in LA, the kind who made their money in ways that didn't appear on tax returns, but the salary he'd mentioned could change her family's life. "Can I meet her?" she'd asked. "Tina?" Something had flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she'd want to meet the child before accepting the job. Most of the previous candidates had been more interested in the salary than his daughter. He'd led her upstairs to a hallway lined with family photos. Marisol had glimpsed images of a beautiful woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Tina's mother, she'd realized. In the photos, Salvatore had looked younger, happier, his arm around his wife as they smiled at the camera. Tina's room had been a little girl's dream. Pink walls, a canopy bed, shelves lined with dolls and books. But the child sitting in the corner, building blocks in careful silence, had looked lost in all that perfection. She'd been tiny for 5, with her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features. When Salvatore had knocked on the doorframe, she'd looked up with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "Tina, this is Miss Vega," he'd said aloud, then repeated in sign language. "She might be your new nanny." Tina had studied Marisol with the serious expression of a child who'd learned not to trust easily. Marisol had knelt down to her level, bringing herself into Tina's line of sight. "Hello, beautiful," she'd signed. "I love your blocks. Are you building a castle?" Tina had nodded slowly, then pointed to the structure she'd been working on. "It's magnificent," Marisol had continued. "Can you show me how you made the towers so tall?" For the next 20 minutes, Marisol had sat on the floor, letting Tina teach her about block architecture. She'd watched the little girl's face slowly come alive, her hands moving more confidently as she explained her building techniques. Behind them, Salvatore had stood in the doorway, and when Marisol had glanced back, she'd seen something like wonder in his expression. "She likes you," he'd said when they'd returned to his study. "Tina doesn't usually engage with strangers." "She's incredible," Marisol had replied honestly. "Smart, creative, just lonely." "The job is yours if you want it," he'd said abruptly. "You can start Monday." That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of watching Tina slowly bloom like a flower finally getting sunlight. 3 months of coaxing smiles and giggles from the serious little girl. 3 months of falling deeper in love with both the child and her impossible father. And now it was ending. As Marisol finished making pancakes for Tina, she remembered that first day. How Tina had taken her hand and led her around the house, showing her all her favorite hiding spots. How Salvatore had watched from doorways, his expression unreadable, but his attention constant. She'd thought she was just taking a job. She'd had no idea she was walking into a family that would capture her heart completely, or that loving them would hurt this much. The morning passed too quickly, and not quickly enough. Marisol helped Tina with her breakfast, played 3 rounds of Go Fish, and read the Polar Express twice, all while her heart broke a little more with each shared smile. Tina seemed to sense something was different. She stayed closer than usual, her small hand finding Marisol's whenever they moved from room to room. During their second reading of the Christmas story, she'd climbed into Marisol's lap and stayed there, her head resting against Marisol's chest. "Are you sad, Mari?" Tina signed when the story ended. Marisol's throat tightened. Sometimes grown-ups get sad, even when they're happy. Does that make sense? Tina considered this seriously, then nodded. Like when I'm happy playing, but sad Mama isn't here to see. The simple wisdom of it nearly undid Marisol completely. Exactly like that, sweetheart. It was nearly 11 when Salvatore appeared in the living room doorway. He'd changed from his morning suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. Even dressed casually, he commanded attention. "Tina," he said, his voice gentler than usual, "Rosa is making cookies in the kitchen. Would you like to help her?" Tina's face lit up. She loved helping Rosa, especially when it involved chocolate chips. She scrambled off Marisol's lap, then paused, signing quickly. "Will you come too, Mari?" "In a few minutes," Marisol promised. "I need to talk to your papa first." After Tina skipped away, the silence in the room felt suffocating. Salvatore moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "You don't have to do this," Marisol said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I do." He didn't turn around. "You've seen what happens when people leave her. She shuts down, stops eating, stops sleeping. I won't watch her go through that again." "So, instead, you're making sure it happens anyway." Marisol stood, frustration and heartbreak warring in her chest. "She loves me, Salvatore, and I love her. Why is that something to run from?" He spun around at the sound of his first name on her lips, his eyes blazing. "Because love isn't enough." The words exploded from him, raw and painful. Maria loved her too, loved us both. And where did that get us? A dead wife, a broken daughter, and a man who can't even comfort his own child because every time I look at her, I see everything I failed to protect. The confession hung between them, brutal in its honesty. Marisol saw him clearly for the first time, not the powerful businessman or dangerous figure others feared, but a man drowning in guilt and grief. "You didn't fail her," she said softly, taking a step toward him. "You didn't fail either of them." "Didn't I?" His laugh was bitter. "Maria begged me to get out, to leave the family business, take Tina somewhere safe. I told her after one more deal, one more year, there was always something more important than my family." His voice broke. "The night she died, I was in a meeting. Some crisis that seemed so urgent. She called, said she didn't feel well, asked me to come home. I told her I'd be there in an hour." Marisol's heart ached for him. "What happened?" "Aneurysm, sudden, massive. She was gone before the ambulance arrived." He turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid. "Tina found her. My 5-year-old daughter found her mother dead on the kitchen floor because I was too busy playing king of my little empire to come home when my wife needed me." The pieces clicked into place. Tina's silence, Salvatore's distance, the careful way he avoided touching his daughter, as if he might contaminate her with his guilt. "That's why you won't let yourself get close to her," Marisol realized. "You think if you don't love her too much, you can't fail her again." "I know I'll fail her again." His voice was flat, certain. "It's what I do. So yes, I keep my distance. I provide for her, protect her, but I don't. I can't." "You can't let yourself be her father." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "I'm not good at this, Marisol. The gentle touches, the bedtime stories, the way you make her laugh. That's not who I am. I'm good at making people afraid, at solving problems with money or force. But a grieving little girl who just wants her papa to hold her? I don't know how to fix that. Marisol moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. You don't have to fix her, Salvatore. You just have to love her. And what happens when I mess up again? When my world touches hers and destroys everything good? He looked at her then, and she saw the fear beneath his anger. What happens when loving her isn't enough to keep her safe? Then you try again. You get up and you try again, because that's what parents do. She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. You think Maria would want you to live like this? Punishing yourself, punishing Tina because you couldn't save her. Don't. The word was a warning, but his hand didn't pull away from her touch. She'd want you to live, Salvatore. To be happy, to be the father Tina needs. Marisol's voice grew stronger, more certain. And she'd want Tina to have people who love her, who stay, who choose her every single day, like you do. The admission was quiet, almost lost in the space between them. But Marisol heard it, felt the weight of everything he wasn't saying. Yes, like I do. She turned her hand, palm up, and after a moment's hesitation, he laced their fingers together. I choose her, Salvatore. Every day, every moment. And I choose you too, even though you're determined to push me away. His grip tightened on her hand. You don't understand what you're saying. What my life is like. The kind of enemies I have. I understand that you're a good man trying to do right by his daughter. I understand that you've been carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry. She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. And I understand that you're scared. But so am I, Salvatore. I'm terrified of leaving her, of never seeing either of you again. But I'm more terrified of a world where love isn't worth fighting for. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. The air between them crackled, with 3 months of unspoken longing, of careful distance finally crumbling. But then the sound of Tina's laughter drifted from the kitchen, and reality crashed back. Salvatore dropped his hand, stepped away, his walls slamming back into place. The car will be here soon, he said, his voice once again carefully controlled. You should say goodbye. Marisol stared at him, seeing the man he could be warring with the man he thought he had to be. This isn't over, Salvatore. Yes, he said quietly. It is. But as she walked toward the kitchen to spend her final hour with Tina, Marisol caught the look in his eyes, and she knew that whatever was between them, this impossible, beautiful, complicated love, was far from finished, even if he was too afraid to admit it. The evening started like any other. Marisol had just finished helping Tina with her bedtime routine, tucking the little girl into her cozy bedroom on the 2nd floor. The child's room was at the far end of the upstairs hallway, well away from the main living areas below. Sweet dreams, baby, Marisol whispered, kissing Tina's forehead as the 5-year-old drifted off to sleep. Downstairs, Salvatore was in his study when his phone buzzed. Marco's voice was tense on the other end. Boss, we've got a situation. The Morettis are sending people over. They're not happy about the dock deal. Salvatore's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the stairs, knowing Tina was safely asleep in her room with 2 of his most trusted guards discreetly positioned in the upper hallway. How long? He asked quietly. 10 minutes, maybe less? Salvatore found Marisol in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. I need you to stay close to me, he said calmly. There's going to be some business visitors. Tina is safe upstairs. My men are watching her floor. This stays down here. Marisol's heart raced, but she nodded. She'd known this day might come. When the black cars pulled up outside, Salvatore positioned himself in the foyer. Marisol stayed behind him, close enough to run upstairs if needed, far enough to be out of immediate danger. 3 men entered without invitation. The leader, a stocky man with cold eyes, spoke first. Bianchi, we need to talk about the waterfront. Then talk, Salvatore replied evenly. His own men flanked the room, hands ready but not drawn. The conversation was tense but controlled. Salvatore's reputation preceded him. These men knew better than to escalate to violence in his home. After 20 minutes of heated negotiation, they reached an understanding. Territory lines were redrawn. Respect was maintained. As the cars disappeared into the night, Salvatore and Marisol quietly checked on Tina. The little girl was still fast asleep, completely unaware that anything had happened. Her peaceful breathing filled the room. "She never knew," Marisol whispered. "And she never will," Salvatore promised. "This is why I keep business away from family." Standing in the doorway of Tina's room, watching her sleep safely, Marisol realized something had shifted. She no longer saw Salvatore as just her employer, or even as the dangerous man she'd heard whispers about. She saw him as the man who made sure his daughter slept peacefully while he handled the storms of his world downstairs. 6 months later, June. The sound of Tina's laughter echoed across the beach house's deck as she chased seagulls along the shoreline, her dark hair flying behind her like a banner. She moved with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved, who had found her voice and wasn't afraid to use it. "Careful, sweetheart," Marisol called, her hands moving in the sign language they still used alongside spoken words. "Don't go too far." "I won't, Mom," Tina called back, the word still sending warmth through Marisol's chest every time she heard it. "Papa, come play with us." Salvatore looked up from the business documents he'd been reviewing, his expression softening as it always did when his daughter called for him. The change in him over the past 6 months had been remarkable, the rigid control replaced by something warmer, more open. "In a minute, Principessa," he called back. "Let me finish this first." They'd moved to the Malibu beach house in February, after Salvatore had made good on his promise to step back from the family business. It hadn't been easy. There had been negotiations, compromises, and a few more tense conversations with men in expensive suits. But he'd been determined to build a different life for his daughter, for their family. Marisol settled into the lounge chair beside him, wearing a simple sundress and the engagement ring he'd given her on Valentine's Day. The proposal had been nothing like the grand gestures she'd seen in movies, just the three of them on this same deck, Tina building sandcastles, while Salvatore quietly asked if she'd consider making their unconventional family official. "How much longer?" she asked, nodding toward his papers. "Almost done. Just reviewing the contracts for the restaurant." He'd invested in a chain of family-friendly Italian restaurants, legitimate businesses that let him use his organizational skills without the moral complications. "Marco thinks the Santa Monica location will be ready to open by August." Marisol smiled. "Tina's going to love having her own booth at Papa's restaurant. She's already planning the grand opening menu," Salvatore said, his own smile breaking through. "Apparently it must include chocolate chip cookies and mac and cheese, or it won't be properly festive." They watched their daughter, and she was their daughter now in every way that mattered, as she discovered a particularly interesting shell and ran toward them to share her treasure. "Mom! Papa! Look what I found!" She scrambled up onto the deck, breathless with excitement. "It's shaped like a heart. Rosa says that means it's magical." Rosa had moved with them to Malibu, declaring that she was too old to train a new family and too fond of Tina to start over. She'd become more grandmother than housekeeper, spoiling Tina shamelessly and teaching her to cook traditional French pastries. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Marisol said, examining the shell seriously. "What kind of magic do you think it has?" Tina considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old philosopher. "I think it's the kind that keeps families together forever." The simple words hit both adults with unexpected force. Salvatore reached out, pulling Tina onto his lap with the easy affection that had taken him months to rediscover. "Is that what you wish for?" he asked softly. "For our family to stay together forever?" "Of course, Papa." Tina looked at him like the question was silly. "We belong together. Mom says that's what love means, choosing each other every day." Marisol felt tears prick her eyes. Tina's transformation had been gradual but profound. The silent, withdrawn child had become a chatterbox who switched effortlessly between spoken English, sign language, and the Italian phrases Salvatore had been teaching her. She'd started kindergarten in the spring and made friends easily, her natural warmth drawing other children like a magnet. But more than that, She'd learned to trust again, to believe that the people who loved her wouldn't disappear without warning. "Mom, are you getting leaky eyes again?" Tina asked, using her old phrase with fond exasperation. "You do that a lot when you're happy." "I do, don't I?" Marisol laughed, wiping her cheeks. "It's because I love you both so much. My heart gets too full to keep it all inside." Tina nodded sagely, then brightened. "Oh, I almost forgot. Rosa said to tell you dinner will be ready in an hour. She's making that pasta you like, Papa, the one with the long name I can't pronounce yet." "Linguine alle vongole," Salvatore supplied. "And you're getting better at Italian every day." "Will you teach me more words after dinner?" Tina asked hopefully. "I want to be able to talk to Nonna when she visits next month." Salvatore's mother had been hesitant about the changes in her son's life at first, but one video call with her granddaughter had won her over completely. Maria Elena Bianchi was flying in from New York for their wedding, bringing what she'd promised would be enough Italian relatives to properly celebrate the family's new beginning. "Of course, Principessa. We'll practice after dinner." Tina beamed, then scrambled off his lap. "I'm going to go help Rosa set the table. She says I'm the best helper she's ever had." As their daughter skipped toward the house, Marisol and Salvatore sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, dotted with other families enjoying the perfect California evening. "Do you ever miss it?" Marisol asked quietly. "The power, the control, the way people used to fear you?" Salvatore considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. When you rule through fear, relationships are straightforward. People do what you want because they're afraid not to." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes warm. "But fear doesn't love you back. It doesn't laugh at your jokes or ask you to read bedtime stories. It doesn't choose you every day because it wants to, not because it has to. And now I have something worth more than power." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I have a daughter who calls me Papa without flinching. I have a woman who sees past everything I used to be to who I could become." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "I have a family, Marisol, a real one. That's worth more than any empire." The sliding door opened, and Tina poked her head out. "Rosa says 5 more minutes, and she made tiramisu for dessert because it's almost the weekend." "We'll be right there, sweetheart," Marisol called back. As Tina disappeared again, Salvatore stood and offered Marisol his hand. "Ready for dinner with our daughter." The word still sent a thrill through her. Our daughter. The adoption papers had been finalized in April, making official what had been true in their hearts since that Christmas Eve, when Tina had first called her mom. "Always," she said, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. As they walked toward the house, Marisol caught sight of their reflection in the sliding glass door. A family heading in for dinner, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Salvatore had his arm around her waist, and she could see Tina through the window, carefully placing napkins at each place setting with Rosa's patient guidance. 6 months ago, she'd been preparing to leave this family forever, convinced that love wasn't enough to overcome the obstacles between them. Now she knew better. Love wasn't just enough. It was everything. It was the foundation they'd built their new life on, the force that had transformed a broken man, a grieving child, and a woman looking for home into something beautiful and whole. "Marisol?" Salvatore's voice was soft, thoughtful. "Yes. Thank you." "For what?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting sun painted everything golden, the beach, the house, his face as he looked at her, with an expression of wonder that still took her breath away. "For staying, for fighting for us when I was too afraid to fight for myself, for showing me that love isn't something to fear, it's something to cherish." His voice grew husky with emotion. "For giving me back my daughter, and showing me how to be the father she deserves." Marisol reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "You don't have to thank me for loving you, Salvatore. That's not a favor or a gift. It's a choice I make every day because you and Tina are the best parts of my life." He leaned down, kissing her with the gentle passion that had replaced the desperate hunger of their early days. This was deeper, richer, the kiss of a man who knew he was loved and wasn't afraid of losing it. "Mom," Papa! Rosa says the pasta is getting cold. Tina's voice carried from inside, filled with 6-year-old impatience. They broke apart, laughing. We're coming, Marisol called back. As they walked into their home, their real, messy, beautiful home, Marisol thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a job interview and a little girl who needed someone to understand her silence. It had grown through shared meals and bedtime stories and the gradual breaking down of walls built by grief and fear. And it had become this, a family choosing each other every single day. Because love wasn't just about the easy moments. It was about the hard ones too. It was about staying when leaving would be simpler, fighting when giving up would be easier, and believing that together they could build something stronger than the sum of their individual broken pieces. Are you happy, Mum? Tina asked as they settled around the dinner table, Rosa bustling around them with maternal efficiency. Marisol looked around the table, at Salvatore serving pasta, with the careful attention he brought to everything he loved, at Rosa fussing over Tina's napkin placement, at their daughter chattering about her day with the confidence of a child who knew she was heard and valued. I'm home, she said simply, and that makes me happier than I ever dreamed possible. Tina beamed, then raised her water glass in a toast she'd learned from watching grown-ups. To our family. To our family, Salvatore and Marisol echoed, clinking their glasses against hers. And as the California sun set over the Pacific, painting their dining room in shades of gold and pink, the Bianchi family settled in for dinner, ordinary and extraordinary, broken and healed, chosen and cherished, together. 2 years later, Christmas Eve, the sound of children's laughter filled the Malibu house as 8-year-old Tina chased her baby brother around the Christmas tree, both of them shrieking with delight. 2-year-old Gabriel, named for the angel who had brought their family together, toddled on unsteady legs, his dark curls bouncing as he tried to escape his sister's tickling fingers. Careful with your brother, Marisol called from the kitchen, where she was putting finishing touches on Christmas Eve dinner. Her hands moved automatically in sign language even as she spoke, a habit that had become second nature in their bilingual, multimodal household. I'm being careful, Mum, Tina called back, switching to sign language as Gabriel tumbled onto the soft rug, giggling. He likes it when I chase him. Look how much he's laughing. Salvatore emerged from his home office, having just finished a video call with the New York restaurant location. At 38, he looked younger than he had 3 years ago, the lines of stress and grief replaced by the kind of contentment that came from a life well lived. How are my bambini doing? He asked, scooping Gabriel up and spinning him around. The little boy squealed with delight, his chubby hands reaching for his father's face. Papa! Papa! Gabriel babbled, his vocabulary still limited but his meaning clear. He adored his father with the uncomplicated devotion of a child who had never known anything but love and security. Tina bounded over, wrapping her arms around Salvatore's waist. Papa, when can we open presents? Rosa said we have to wait until after dinner, but that's forever away. Rosa is right, Salvatore said, ruffling her hair with his free hand, but I think we can manage one small present before dinner. What do you think, Mum? He looked at Marisol with the question, and she felt the familiar flutter in her chest at being included in every decision, every moment that mattered. Even after 2 years of marriage and a lifetime of promises, she sometimes still marveled at the reality of this life they'd built. I think that sounds reasonable, she said, wiping her hands on her apron, but only one, and only because it's Christmas Eve. Tina cheered, then paused, her expression growing thoughtful. Mum, do you remember my first Christmas Eve with you, when I said Mum for the first time? Marisol's throat tightened with emotion. Of course I remember, sweetheart. It was the most beautiful Christmas present I've ever received. I remember too, Tina said seriously. I remember being scared that you would leave like Mama did, but you didn't leave. You stayed, even when those scary men came to the house. Salvatore and Marisol exchanged a look over their daughter's head. They told her an age-appropriate version of that day, that some people had disagreed with Papa about business, but everything had been resolved safely. The full truth could wait until she was older. I promised I wouldn't leave you, Marisol said, kneeling down to Tina's level. "And I always keep my promises. I know, that's why I wasn't scared when Gabriel was born, because I knew you'd love us both the same." Tina's matter-of-fact statement made both adults' eyes water. "And you do. You love us both exactly right." Gabriel chose that moment to reach for Marisol, babbling, "Mama, Mama," with the insistent tone of a toddler who wanted his mother's attention immediately. Marisol took him from Salvatore, settling him on her hip where he immediately began playing with her earrings. "What do you think, little man? Ready for Christmas dinner?" "Cookie," Gabriel declared, his current favorite word and solution to most problems. "After dinner," Marisol laughed. "Rosa made your favorite cookies, but you have to eat your vegetables first." The sliding door opened, and Rosa appeared, her silver hair perfectly styled despite having spent the day cooking. At 70, she showed no signs of slowing down, especially when it came to spoiling her adopted grandchildren. "Dinner is ready," Rosa announced in her mix of French-accented English and sign language. "And before you ask, ma petite Tina, yes, I made extra cookies for Santa." Tina's eyes lit up. "Did you remember to leave out milk too? Gabriel helped me write the note for Santa, and we told him about the cookies." "Of course, chérie. Everything is perfect." Rosa's eyes twinkled as she looked at the family gathered around the Christmas tree. Just like it should be. As they moved toward the dining room, Marisol caught Salvatore's hand, squeezing gently. The dining table was set with Rosa's best china, candles flickering warmly, and a centerpiece of fresh flowers and pine boughs that filled the room with the scent of Christmas. "Before we eat," Salvatore said, settling Gabriel in his high chair while Tina climbed into her booster seat, "I want to say something." He stood at the head of the table, his dark eyes moving from face to face. Rosa, who had become the grandmother his children adored. Tina, who had grown from a silent, broken little girl into a confident, joyful child. Gabriel, who babbled happily while banging his spoon against his tray. And finally, Marisol, who had transformed not just his life but his very soul. "3 years ago I thought my life was over," he said quietly. "I thought the best I could do was provide for my daughter and keep her safe. But that love, real love, the kind that heals and builds and creates, was beyond my reach." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "I was wrong." He moved to stand behind Marisol's chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "This woman walked into our house as a nanny and became the heart of our family. She taught my daughter to trust again, taught me to hope again, and gave us both a love so fierce and true that it changed everything we thought we knew about what family could be." Tina was listening with the serious attention she gave to all important adult conversations, while Gabriel continued his happy babbling, oblivious to the emotional weight of the moment. And now we have Gabriel, this perfect little boy who will grow up knowing nothing but love and security, who will never doubt that he belongs, that he's wanted, that his family will always choose him. Salvatore's voice grew husky with emotion. "That's the gift you gave us all, amore mio. Not just love, but the certainty of love." Marisol felt tears sliding down her cheeks, the happy kind that Tina always teased her about. "Salvatore, I'm not finished," he said with a gentle smile, reaching into his pocket. "I know we're already married, already a family in every way that matters, but I wanted to give you something to mark this Christmas, this moment when everything is exactly as it should be." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Marisol's breath caught. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant that took her breath away. It was a heart, but not just any heart. It was made from 3 smaller hearts intertwined, each one set with a different stone. Emerald for Tina's May birthday, sapphire for Gabriel's September birth, and ruby for their own July wedding. "The jeweler called it a mother's heart," Salvatore said softly, lifting the necklace from its box. "One heart made of many, stronger together than apart." "It's beautiful," Marisol whispered, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. The pendant settled just over her heart, warm against her skin. "Like our family," Tina said solemnly, understanding the symbolism with the wisdom of a child who had learned that love came in many forms. All different pieces that fit together perfectly. "Exactly like our family," Salvatore agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of Marisol's head before returning to his seat. As they began their Christmas Eve dinner, the conversation flowed easily between English, sign language, and the occasional Italian phrase. Gabriel made a delightful mess with his pasta, Tina told elaborate stories about her school friends, and Rosa regaled them with tales of Christmas celebrations from her childhood in France. But underneath the cheerful chatter, Marisol was acutely aware of the profound contentment that filled every corner of this moment. This was what she dreamed of as a little girl in Guadalajara, not the wealth or the beautiful house, but this feeling of belonging completely and unconditionally. After dinner, they gathered around the Christmas tree for the traditional opening of one present. Tina chose a package for Gabriel, helping him tear the wrapping paper to reveal a soft stuffed elephant that immediately became his new favorite thing. "My turn to give presents," Tina announced, disappearing under the tree to retrieve two carefully wrapped packages. "I made these myself, with Rosa's help." She handed the first to Marisol, a photo album she'd decorated with stickers and drawings, filled with pictures of their family from the past year. Each photo had a caption in Tina's careful handwriting: "Mom and me at the beach," "Papa teaching me to ride my bike," "Gabriel's first Christmas." The second package went to Salvatore, a coffee mug she'd painted herself, decorated with handprints from both children and the words, "World's Best Papa," in slightly wobbly letters. "These are perfect," Marisol said, hugging Tina tightly. "The most beautiful presents I've ever received." "I wanted you to remember," Tina explained, "all the happy times. So when you're old like Rosa, you can look at the pictures and remember how much we love each other." As the evening wound down and they tucked both children into bed, Gabriel in his crib, still clutching his new elephant, and Tina in her big girl bed, surrounded by the books and stuffed animals that made her feel safe, Marisol and Salvatore found themselves alone on the deck, watching the stars reflect on the dark ocean. "Do you ever think about that first Christmas Eve?" Marisol asked, curled against Salvatore's side on the outdoor sofa. "How different everything was." "Every day," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing both of you, because I was too afraid to believe in second chances. But you didn't lose us. We're here, we're happy, and we're not going anywhere." She tilted her head to look at him, this man who had become her anchor, her partner, her greatest love. "That's what matters." "Ti amo, Marisol Bianchi," he said softly, using the Italian words that still made her heart skip. "More than I ever thought possible." "Te amo también, mi corazón," she replied, mixing Spanish endearments with English as naturally as breathing. "Forever and always." As they sat together under the California stars, the house quiet behind them filled with their sleeping children, Marisol touched the pendant at her throat and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a job interview and a desperate father's need for help with his grieving daughter. It had become a love story for the ages, not because it was easy, but because it was real, because they had chosen each other every day, through fear and doubt, and the kind of obstacles that might have broken a lesser love. And now, on this perfect Christmas Eve, with their children safe and happy, their future bright with possibility, and their love stronger than ever, Marisol knew with absolute certainty that some Christmas miracles were worth waiting for, some families were worth fighting for, and some love stories were meant to last forever. "Merry Christmas, amore mio," Salvatore whispered against her hair. "Merry Christmas, mi vida," she whispered back. And in the distance, as if the universe itself was celebrating their happiness, the first snow of the season began to fall. Rare and magical in Southern California, a perfect ending to a perfect day in the life of a family that had learned that love, real love, could overcome anything, even silence, even fear, even the belief that some people were too broken to be healed. Because in the end, love didn't just conquer all. It transformed everything it touched into something beautiful, something whole, something worth celebrating every single day, forever and always.